welcome back. Welcome to week 2. I'm glad you made it. If you're watching this video, this means you're persisting in the class and you're moving right along and you're moving and grooving and you made a beachhead into the topic. Now, this week we're going to talk about what we call in the OB field as individual characteristics, individual differences, perceptions, motivation. And so again, as I mentioned in our first week, the first level that we think about organizational behavior is at the individual level, right? Remember we talked about the different levels, individual, interpersonal, group, and organizational, and then strategic, interacting with other organizations. We're going to dial in this week. We're going to focus like a laser beam on the bottom level, personal level. Now this level has a lot of streams of thought that have fed into it. Again, individual psychology, personal psychology, motivation, personality. There's a lot of things that OB has borrowed from the larger social sciences that really feed into this. And so again, because OB has to do with people, it's a very complex and rich field, and there's a lot of streams of thought and research that have fed into it over the years. And so when you're reading about some of these things, you might say, well, I kind of knew, I had heard about that from my psych class or something like that, when you talk about motivation or you talk about perception or attribution, things like that. Right, so these ideas didn't originate in OB, but they've been appropriated, and they help us to understand why people, behave the way they do in an organizational context. So, we behave differently in an organization than we do in our home, for example, don't we? Right, so we have different roles, and when we're at work, we have one role, and we're home, we have a different role, right? So at work, I'm the manager, I'm the boss. Or I'm the employee, I'm the staff person. At a home, I'm the father, and I'm the dad, and I'm the husband, and all these sorts of things. So OB really helps us think about individuals in this work context. So it's not understanding everything that people think about themselves and all their hang-ups and Freudian issues and all those sorts of things, but it does borrow and leverage some of the things we know about individual personality and psychology in a work context, all right? Now, the first level I want to talk about is what's called individual differences or individual characteristics. I believe the textbook calls it that. Now, this has to do with the fact that people bring in a lot of different things into their work life and their work behavior. Now, we understand from personality psychology that there's a variety of personality types out there, and you may be familiar with some of these models, right? So one of the big ones is Myers-Briggs, right? And it talks about the 4 different types of the 4 different variables that we have, or the pairs of variables that lead to 16 different personality types. So you may have taken Myers-Briggs before and figured out which personality types. Now I know I'm an INTJ, right? Okay. So you may know that, but this idea of personality is important, and especially when you take it to the interpersonal level and the group level, right? Because now it's not just about my personality, but it's how my personality impacts other personalities, how it's perceived by other personalities. So you may be a highly conscientious, focused, driven, responsible kind of person, all right? And you may be working in finance, or you may be responsible for R&D, and so you have a lot of specific tasks and things that you need to get done. Well, then you've got the other people that are maybe more conceptual, more creative, right? A little more free thinking, outside of the box kind of people. And they're great because we need those people in organizations. We need new ideas. We need people that are intuitive and visionary and in touch with what's going on in the field and whatnot. And so what happens when you get these people together, right? You see the potential for conflict right away, because these people are very much feet to the ground, structured, rational, and these people are more intuitive, visionary, These people will see these people as gotten their heads in the clouds, and these people will see these people as, stuck in the mud or sticks in the mud, right? So this interpersonal level, this individual level starts to impact other levels right away, as you can see. So again, my level theory here is good conceptually. Practically speaking, though, there's a lot of interaction and inner workings between the two. All right, so getting back to Probably getting ahead of myself. So getting back to this idea of individual differences. So personality is one, and then there's other things too. And we talked about things like gender and nationality. Age is another one. But what about things like experience and skills? Sometimes skills, for example, has a lot to do with how we're going to work, right? So anybody who's worked in HR knows you want to bring in people with, the appropriate skills. And also experience, right? Experience is important. And this is going to impact how people work, how they get their job done, how much training they're going to need, how they're going to be impacted, how they're going to interact with other people, how people will perceive them. For example, your senior people who've been around for a long time, maybe they've been in the organization or the field for 15, 20 years, they're going to look at some of these newbies, these kids don't know anything, and so it can create some issues. But you also need to leverage that, right? You need to take advantage of these people to train the younger people. So you've got the skill levels, experience level, but then you have other things too that have nothing to do with job characteristics. You have things, for example, socioeconomic and culture, right, and language differences and all these sorts of things. So it's important in OB and in management, moreover, to really understand where people are at. Now, you don't necessarily, you might be saying, what do I have to do? Do I have to cater to every different kind of little nuance? No, not necessarily. But when you're dealing with people, when you're managing people, you're trying to get the most out of people. It's important for you to understand who they are on an individual level in terms of their background, socioeconomic, personality, gender, all those sorts of things, experience. That's going to help you to get along. You can't take a one-size-fits-all when you're managing individuals, right? Okay. Now, the next idea here that we want to talk about are what called perceptions and attributions. Now, this can kind of get complicated. So let me just kind of give you some, big picture ideas, some ways to think about this. We all have certain predispositions. We all have certain attitudes and attributes that we bring with us to work. Now, when OB people talk about attitude, they're not talking about like, well, she was sporting a tude, or he was sporting a tude. We're not talking about like a bad attitude necessarily. And attitudes can be bad, but an attitude is sort of a predisposition to see things in a certain way. Now, you may have heard of things like biases and prejudice and stereotypes. Well, these are all attitudes. These are all ways of seeing things. And our minds are very complex, and what our minds do at a very base level is they make sense of a lot of information. And the reason why we develop some of these stereotypes and biases is because they help us make quick judgments about things at a large level. Now, and again, we think of stereotypes as a bad thing, right? And they usually are a bad thing. You don't want to categorize everybody in a group like this. All those people are like this. That's not a good thing. We don't want to do that. But it's important to understand how the mind works and why it does that. It's doing that because it's trying to make sense out of the world. It's trying to save itself some time so that it can work more efficiently. So stereotyping is a byproduct of our mind's approach to making sense out of a very complex world. Now, of course, when we harbor bad stereotypes and biases and those sorts of things, it's not good, right? So one of the things that we need to do in terms of attributions and perceptions is to kind of break down some of those gut level assumptions and by those judgments we make about people that are not necessarily correct or healthy. Right, so there's some tests out there that you can do, some bias tests and those sorts of things. There's some other cool things and interesting things about attributions. A lot of times we will attribute why something works or why something doesn't work, why something happened, why something didn't happen, based on certain factors. And there's what's called the self-enhancement bias, right? Whereby if something went well, we say that it was, because of our own hard work. We like to take credit for things, don't we? We all do that, right? But then there's the other side of it, which says if something didn't work, it was probably the fault of that person, right? So we kind of make assumptions about the success of things. It's called the attribution bias, right? We have a self-enhancement bias whereby we think that our hard work, etc., is the reason for the success. And if something goes wrong, we think it was the fault of somebody else, right? And this idea of attributing things to other people. All right, so it might have been a little confusing in my discussion there, but read about attribution bias, self-enhancement bias is very important. Now, the next big topic we're going to talk about here is what is called motivation. Now, scholars have been doing research on motivation for a long time, and it's very interesting, it's very important in terms of organizational behavior. Now, there's a lot of different theories of motivation. They're typically broken down into two larger fields. There are the content theories and there's the process theories, right? So the content theories are some of these ideas that help us, they're more descriptive, right? They're more descriptive about what motivates people. And process are a little more prescriptive. We can actually use some of these things. They're more goal-oriented. They help us sort of set goals, etc. And that leads into sort of the next attitude. So you have motivation, what motivates people, and then there's motivation at work. So how do we take some of these theories of motivation and apply them in a work context in order to improve organizational, individual, and organizational performance? All right, so that's kind of one way of thinking about motivation, is in terms of the theoretical, conceptual, and then the practical. How do we leverage some of these ideas? And again, I don't want you to think, well, we're motivating people like we're whipping the cows to get them to come in at night, right? Kind of this, what's been called cow psychology or cow sociology, whereby one of the criticisms of OB and this whole human relations movement was that people were leveraging, taking advantage of some of these ideas in order to, corral people and to get them to perform, right? So we don't necessarily look at it like that. We don't, we're not taking advantage of people, so we're not like tricking people. Motivation's not this deceptive black art whereby as a manager you can convince people to do things they don't want to do. That's not what it is at all. But it really just is an understanding the human makeup, what motivates people, what they're motivated by, and the other side is what demotivates people and what turns them off. Half of your job as a manager is understanding why your people are no longer motivated, what stopped them from being motivated. If you can remove some of those barriers, if you can deal with some of those issues, half of your job is done. So there's sort of the positive, let's motivate, and there's the removing the negative side. So I'm not going to lecture over all the different theories of motivation. I've done that in the past. In fact, do a little research. You can find some of my videos for other classes that I've done. But I have to create original content for this class, so I'm not going to put it in there. But there's a lot of good stuff out there on motivation. Let me just mention a couple of ones that I think are particularly helpful. Obviously, we have to understand Maslow. Maslow is the baseline, right, upon which a lot of these others are built. And the basic idea behind Maslow is that there's a hierarchy of needs. People have a hierarchy of needs, and the lower needs are the physical needs. I need to stay alive. I need to stay warm. I need to, survive. I need food, all those kinds of things. Then you sort of move up to some of those social, interactive. I need to have relationships. I need to be significant with another person. I need to be loved. I need to have, care and esteem. And then the highest level is sort of the the achievement, recognition. I need to, be a useful human being. I need my life to count for something. And then there's this theoretical self-actualization. I'm a self-actualized human being. Now, we know as Christians, we can really only have that in Christ, right? Jesus self-actualizes us in a sense. No amount of achievement or recognition or reward is going to ever satisfy our souls, right? But having said that, Maslow is still a useful tool. Now, the other ones that come out of it, so for example, Herzberg's dual factor theory and ERG are sort of like hybrids of Maslow. And what they do is they categorize these things just a little bit differently. So, for example, Erdős' hygiene theory, right, of motivation says that there's two categories of motivators. There's what's called the hygiene factors, and the hygiene factors are things that have to be present, and if they're not present, we will be dissatisfied. But their presence will not necessarily mean that we are satisfied. In order to be satisfied, i.e. motivated, we have to have some of these other things. So the hygiene factors are things like, basic working conditions, right? Is my office cool, temperature-wise, right? Not cool like decor. I guess that would matter to some people too. But is it a good working environment? Do I have sufficient pay, right? Do I have benefits? Sort of some of these tangible things. And then there's the Then there's the motivators, and these are the things that are a little more subjective and nuanced, right? Like, do I get recognition for a job well done? Am I being rewarded for my hard work? Do I have opportunities for meaningful and challenging work? Right? Because let's face it, you know, people want challenge and they want meaning. Nobody wants to do the same sort of job over and over. So the theory says, if we have these baseline things, these satisfiers, the hygiene factors, we will be satisfied. And if we don't have them, those won't necessarily take the place for some of these higher order things. So in order for us to be motivated, we need to have some of these higher order things like recognition and achievement and whatnot. All right, so that's kind of helpful because it helps us to see the difference in how these things motivate. And you can't use them one for the other. So for example, let's just say you have a staff member who's kind of demotivated these days. And you say, I know what I'll do. I'll offer him some more money. And so you call him into the office and you say, hey, you know what? You've been doing a great job around here. We're gonna give you a raise. And he says, all right, that sounds good, you know. And for about a month or 2 months, he's like kind of excited about his job again. And then one day he wakes up and says, you know, I got a little more money in my pocket, but I still hate my job. You know, it still sucks. There's no opportunity for advancement or recognition. You know, the work is kind of meaningless to me. It doesn't tap into my aspirations and whatnot. And so, you know, his performance will kind of go back down the tubes. Well, see, you had a mismatch there between you took something that was a hygiene need and you tried to use it as a motivator, right? So it's not necessarily going to work. So if somebody is demotivated because of some of these higher aspirational needs, that's what you need to meet. And here's the good news. Those things are free, right? Some people say, man, it's so hard to, you know, especially in a volunteer context, right? I worked with a lot of pastors before and church folks, and they say, well, we don't pay money. We don't pay. How do I get people to show up, blah, blah, blah. Hey, guess what? You're going to get the best work out of your people that are intrinsically motivated, that are there because they want to do something that's meaningful and important to them, not for the money. Right? So leverage this little bit about human psychology, find ways to motivate people at some of their higher aspirational needs like recognition, opportunity for meaningful work, you know, give them the chance to achieve something, accomplish something in their work, and you'll get a lot of stuff done out of them. All right, and then there's ERG, you know, which is very similar to these two. Let me talk about one other one too, and I believe this is in the process category. This is what's called Adams equity. Now, equity theory is a good one. This one really explains a lot. Basically, equity theory says we will compare our inputs with those inputs of other people who we see as our in a similar light as ourselves. In other words, our peers, not our boss or our subordinates, but somebody we consider a peer. We will compare our inputs, i.e. what we've done, what we bring to the table, things like, you know, how hard we work, the kinds of goals we accomplish, right? Do we accomplish our sales goals or whatever kind of goals we have for ourselves in the organization? And maybe even our background, our education, those sorts of things. So we compare those inputs with others. And we see how we are treated in response to those other people. And if we feel like we are treated fairly with those other people, we will feel like there's equity. But if we feel like we are unfairly treated when compared to those other people, we will feel like we've been treated unfairly, or it's an unjust situation. So let me give you an example. Let's just say, you know, you and your colleague both have the same education, you know, you both went to Life Pacific University and you got these great degrees and you're both working hard and you're both about the same age, you know, you're doing the same job, meeting the same goals. And then one day you find out that this guy got a raise and you didn't get a raise. He got a promotion and a raise and you didn't. And you're thinking, well, what's up with that? I worked just as hard. I got the same degree, right, from the same school. I've been working here as long. You know, I'm just as good looking as that person. How come they got a raise and they've got a promotion and I didn't? That's not fair. That's what we say to ourselves, right? And so when we perceive this inequity, there's likely results, right? So there's a few things the literature lists, and you can read about this in your book. We will withdraw, right? We will reduce our amount of work. Well, that's the way they're going to treat me. You know, see if I work hard for them anymore. We can sort of go against the system, right? So we can kind of like, you know, the boss here, I don't know if you heard this, but he's got some psychological problems, right? We can, you know, we can leave. We can just say, it's just not fair, right? And perhaps you've even left a job where you thought, you know, this just isn't fair, I'm not treated fairly, and you've left. Or, you know, sadly, some people will, you know, go postal. They'll do something, you know, damaging or, you know, criminal against, you know, the people they work with. So that's kind of an extreme case, and I know we see those things in the news. That's not the norm, but, you know, there's on-the-job violence. There's ways that people can respond and react to a sense of injustice. And, you know, why is there this sense of justice or equity in all our souls? I believe it's because we're all made in God's image, and because God is a just God. And so we believe that, you know, justice and fairness are important, right? And so when we see injustice and when we feel injustice in the work context, you know, let alone all the other contexts in the world, we feel it really acutely, and it hurts us at a very deep level. So why do I feel like this one is so important? Because I think that, you know, some managers inadvertently can demotivate people by creating circumstances that are unfair to people. And again, this happens a lot in some of your smaller mom and pop organizations, family organizations, right? And it's really hard on people, you know. So when the dad, for example, rewards, you know, one son over another son, well, this son might be thinking, well, why did he get it? I didn't. Oh, okay, well, it's dad's prerogative to do that. Well, we all understand that. We love dad, and we're going to let dad do what he wants to do, but deep inside there's some hurt and resentment. So take it out of a family context. Let's just say you're a manager, and you say, you know, Joe here, we get along and we play golf, and, you know, he's my friend. I have him over for barbecues. You know, we get along really good, me and Joe. And I think I'm going to give him this special assignment. And you might have Fred over here who says, well, you know, what's up with me? You know, I could do that job just as good as Joe could. I've been working here longer. And so all of a sudden now you've got this situation where Joe feels it's inequitable, right? Now as a boss, you're just thinking, hey, I like Fred. No, wait. Right? I'm getting my names confused. I like this person here. He's a friend of mine, and I want to do a solid for him, right? And you might be thinking, what's wrong with that? I'm the boss. I can do that. That's my prerogative. Yes, you are the boss, and yes, it is your prerogative. However, you need to realize, Mr. Boss, that your action, your behavior is creating a tension within your employees' minds and hearts and souls, and that there's going to be some likely consequences that are going to come as a result of that, of which I've just listed before, right? Okay, so 2 theories of motivation. Now, the next thing you want to know about motivation is how to apply some of these things. So it's good to know the theories of motivation. You're saying, well, how as a manager do I really appropriate those? And one of the most common ways we do it is through what's known as the goal setting approaches and evaluations and rewards, right? So if we know that people are motivated to accomplish certain things, and we believe that there are certain goals that they set, we need to understand how to develop systems that are intrinsically rewarding and motivating for those people, right? So again, we always think about things like money and bonuses and those sorts of things when we talk about reward, but there's a lot of other things that people would really like to have in their work context that are not necessarily monetary. Right? So for example, the opportunity to accomplish something, right? So if we know somebody would like to have a plum position or opportunity or a new assignment, that can be a reward, that can be a motivator to them. So that will incentivize them to move hard. And then again, of course, you know, people do want money and those sorts of things. But remember, money is this hygiene motivator, right? It's not necessarily going to satisfy some of these higher order. So this idea of, you know, understanding motivation in a work context, using goal setting and rewards is very complex and nuanced. And but it's important. It's an important way for you to understand and think about motivations and what your reward system is actually doing in the organization. So if you link your rewards to specific performance goals, and you can evaluate people, right? And again, this is the important function of human resources, to evaluate people properly. And we evaluate people and we see if they've met their performance goals, and if they have, then they are rewarded, right? So people are motivated to do things, first of all, if they think they can accomplish something, and if the goal for accomplishing something is actually valuable to them, right? So I believe this is Lawler or one of those theories, right? You're going to read about path goal theory, right? And so as a manager, you have to help people to accomplish their goals. You can't give them goals that are too high because they'll never accomplish them. That'll be demotivating them. Or you can't give them goals that are too low because those won't be motivating to them enough, right? So when it comes to goal setting and motivation, you got to find that sweet spot of a goal that is challenging enough for them to strive towards, but not so challenging they'll never accomplish it. So let's just take an example, sales. Let's just say you set up some sales goals. Say, all right, let's use some female names here. You say, Sarah, we want you. We believe in you. We want you to sell 1,000 widgets this month, right? 1,000 widgets. And Sarah's like, man, well, I only sold 100 last month, and I sold 100 the month before, and now I'm not going to get this promotion, or I'm not going to get the raise or the bonus unless I sell 1,000. That's never going to happen, right? So Sarah right away just gives up. It's too much. But if you said, hey, Sarah, you did 100 this month, 100 this month. We want you to sell 130 widgets this month. And if you sell 130 widgets, these things will be forthcoming. And Sarah thinks, I think I could do that. 100, this is 30% more, but man, I think I can do that. And so she works hard and she works hard and she accomplishes her goals, right? Okay, so you want to find that sweet spot for goal setting. Otherwise, it's not motivating. And then the other thing is the reward has to be meaningful to that person. And again, it could be money or it could be something else. It could be recognition. It could be an opportunity for advancement. It could be some more meaningful work. It could be some more new challenging work. A lot of people, as they're moving up, they want challenge. And let's face it, if you've been in a job, sort of the same job for, 3 to 5 years, things start to get stale after a while. Right? So if you really like that person and you want to keep them motivated, you reward them by giving them other opportunities to grow and to move within the organization. That keeps them moving. You could give them some more money, but if they're doing exactly the same thing, that's not the goal that they want, right? So it has to be achievable and it has to be desirable in order for it to motivate them. And then again, this is all tied into your evaluation and your performance and your reward system that the HR people do. Right? So again, we kind of treat some of this HR reward evaluation stuff as organizational window dressing. And a lot of times that's what it is. It's just something we have to do. We have to say we do it and blah, blah, blah. And managers, employees don't take it very seriously. But think about this. What if you could design a valuation reward system that was actually meaningful, right? So it was actually helped managers to get the kinds of results from their people, and it actually helped people to accomplish some of the goals they have in their own personal, professional development. Then all of a sudden you've got a performance management reward system that actually is valuable, and it's not just organizational window dressing and checking off the box. So again, I know this is challenging stuff, but there are organizations that have done it. We're going to read some of the case studies of how this is done, and you're going to find out. So this should be an aspiration for you as a manager to think about how your performance reward evaluation system is tying into your organizational strategy, how it's keeping people motivated. All right? So I think that's about all I want to say about these topics. I hope this was useful. We went through things like individual differences, perceptions, attributions, motivations theories, and then motivation at work. And again, this is what your textbook's talking about this week. So dig into those textbooks, dig into those lessons, dig into all the additional material you're going to find on the Cengage site, and you get a lot more detail here. Again, I'm kind of giving you big picture and some of my own insights and maybe a little Christian insight now and again. But you really need to dig into the course content in order to understand these things fully. So I hope this was helpful. Blessings to you guys, and we'll see you all online.